If you're a B2B business, a B2B tech company, or a B2B marketer, you're in the right place. Coming to you from Studio 26, this is the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast, bringing you interesting contemporary takes, industry tips, guest interviews, and true stories from B2B marketers in the trenches. Now, here's your host, Steve Goldhaber.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Studio 26 for another episode of Interesting B2B Marketers. I'm joined today by Ryan Paul Gibson. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm looking forward to jumping right in to your stories. You've been in the B2B space for a long time, right? Like 20 some years?
Yeah, 20 years. I had a brief detour as a TV and radio reporter for about 3 years. When I got to the end of my first sort of senior position, I was like, is this what I want? Do I want to do this? And it was really, I just burned out of that industry. I'd worked in hospitality and I'd been in it since I was a teenager, working for my parents. So I was 30 at the time. And I think I just need a break.
Yeah.
So I pivoted into broadcasting, which was amazing. And it wasn't my calling, but I learned a ton. I learned a lot that I apply today. So yeah, so minus the little break, 20 years. Yeah.
Nice. All right. So like we always do, we're jumping right into the stories. And the first one you're going to share with us has to do with an environment where an acquisition has just taken place. And is it seamless? Is it not seamless? I will turn it over to you to tell the story.
Well, they're supposed to be in theory, right? That's
in the boardroom, yes, they're always seamless in the
boardroom where everything makes sense and there's no outside market forces that impact anything. Yeah, no, I mean, they're a great path to growth, right? If you can find those opportunities. And I've been working with a company that had found one. But the theory is that if you have if it fits into the product portfolio, if this is a software company, or even if it's a service line, because it happens, and sometimes we acquire service companies, it should fit nicely. And, we have a sales and marketing engine and everything should take off and we should see some revenue come in at the forecast that we put in our annual or quarterly plans. And that did not happen here. So I got tapped alongside with one of their product marketers to go understand why. And it actually would have been the first time that this company had conducted what I call qualitative customer research, which is really understanding the depths of how and why buyers buy, to keep it very simple. So that was the sort of the impetus for that. And it was a fun project and we learned a lot.
Yeah, I'm amazed that sometimes marketers are in this like research or no research camp. Like you talk about doing research and it comes up as such a exotic creature. Like what? Like we would pay to get people's opinions to shape our roadmap. And I feel like, I started in the old school advertising world where to get to TV or print, you had to test. You would never foolishly spend media. So you would go to focus groups. And today, I think there's so much pressure on marketers to just launch. And hey, it's okay if you launch and it doesn't work. So let's course correct. But do you get that? You've got a really strong background in research. Do you encounter that where it's just kind of like some people, you really have to get them over that hump of research is a strange, exotic thing?
Yeah, I get that. I think you defined it nicely, which is the research or no research camp. I think the reasons for that, there's a spectrum of. When I started in B2B, like I had to do it myself. I worked in a B2B to C play where I had to do all the customer research, but it was vital to our survival. And then when I went to B2B and I started working with companies, and one of the things I'd first ask them, especially a lot of the technical led founders, so when you talk to the customers about, why what's going on, what do they say? And they looked at me like I'd asked them something in a different language. And I was always struck by that. Immediately, I still think of that moment today. And as I've gone along my career, there's different, some companies do it and do it well. Some companies do it and don't do it well. Some companies don't do it at all. And for me, I always say, Steve, I think maybe it's, some of it I think is maybe just how B2B has come up in the digital age, where you have a whole generation of marketers that have just had CRMs and SEO, and it's almost been handed to them on a silver platter. And it's very new for them to try to understand the psychology and the rationales of buyers. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that's part of it. But I always look at marketing as trying to understand the market. And if I don't understand how and why a segment of a market is making decisions about a certain set of solutions or problems they have, it's going to be really hard for me to influence their decision-making process. And for me, a lot of that stems from the research of where we spend our money in a go-to-market, right, strategy. So I don't know if that touches on what you had in mind, but that's how I see things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've done less research the more I've aged in my marketing career. And, when I was doing more research, what was also interesting, I noticed, is that of the group that were pro research, there were two subsets. I'm creating all these fake personas, which is fun. Who knows if these personas exist? But I felt like it was people who did research as an insurance policy. So they had come up with an idea or a campaign. They wanted it validated so that if they rolled it out and it failed, they said, well, the research validated the idea, so I don't know what happened. Then there were the people who were pro research learning mode. So it was like, I want them to tell me that our advertising campaign or a marketing program sucks, because I want to be able to deconstruct it. And I felt like the companies where I worked for really big clients, they were mostly in that research as an insurance policy camp. They didn't want to make a bad decision. And I've seen that with the people who were more curious with research to really learn. They tended to be at the mid-market, smaller companies, because they were like, this is amazing. This totally takes us in a new direction. But yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know if that's just my unique perspective. I used to do a lot of, hey, we're going to spend $5-10 million on media. So there was a lot of risk with that, and they didn't want to put themselves in a position with a CEO who was like, hey, you've just spent $10 million and I don't think it worked. So yeah, I don't know. I'm going on a tangent now. I'm reliving my research scars.
I mean, I use the word de-risking myself. I think that's part of it. But if it's de-risking because you want to wash your hands of it, that's not how I see it. I see it as there's only so much money to go around. And if for people who have never sat in, at a leadership table, the money is debated about where it goes across the company, not just into marketing, right? Like, you have to make a case for why you should get more over, say, the development team, who's trying to attract engineers, which get more paid higher than gods. It's just like, and for good reason, they're figuring really important stuff out. But you have to make a case for, okay, I want to invest the capital of this company into these activities for these reasons. And these are the ways I've de-risked the decision of wasting our money. Doesn't mean I'm absolutely right, but that's true for anything in a business, because it's a bet. It's a strategic bet in a market. You don't know if your product's going to be fully adopted or your new feature or whatever, right? You do your best to make and educate a guess. Where I lean more into is the second camp you talked about, which is the learner camp. That's just my nature. I think that the more you understand about your buyer, the more you can use that as a competitive advantage for you in the market. Because I guarantee you, a lot of your competitors are not doing that. Mm-hmm. So if you can find out really unique things about how they're making decisions, right? And if I may, to go back to the story that we talked about, one key thing we learned was the extent at which prospects were trying to build their own tools, because there was developers that were similar to the product we were selling, but we didn't know at which the volume of which they were trying to do that, right? It was happening every single time, almost with every single person we talked to. We didn't realize that. And then when we looked at our marketing, we said, that's nowhere in our journey. Like that pivotal point of where they learn that they can't execute on this thing that we can do better, we are nowhere to be seen, right? So if you learn these things, you can use them to your advantage. And then so when we accounted for that, because what happened, installs doubled within the first few weeks of the software product that we were working on. And it wasn't a fluke. The product marketing manager was very skeptical at first. We're like, I don't know, let's wait a little bit longer to see if this is just like a bump in our but year over year, but no, an anomaly, but it wasn't. We had just figured out one critical piece that we had missed.
Yeah. You know, one thing I've taken away too from when I've done research is to use the language of the customer in simple things. You know, like
Yeah.
we're sometimes so enamored with, oh, we're marketers. We know how to tell this story better than anyone else. But when you start to hear repetitive language over and over again, use that language and just make it something that they identify with. I remember another marketer was sharing a story about they were a copywriter and they were telling me about their kind of methodology for understanding the pain of the customer. And they would go to product review sites and they would just listen and they would just empathize and they would use that same vocabulary. And
Yeah.
the marketing was just that much more effective. Not because like it was the copywriter who was a great copywriter. It was because they just related to the audience so much. So it's another way I've seen research work really well.
Absolutely. They call that review mining right today.
Yeah.
It's like one of the best ways to start learning really quickly, because customer research, depending on what you do, and there's surveys, there's one-on-one interviews, there's focus groups. Those can take time, right? And to distill, the data. Reviews are there, whether it's your own or a third party like G2, right, or Capterra, whoever. All that is there for you to use and learn quickly about what people are saying about your product and in earnest what they're saying.
All right. Anything else about our first story before we jump into the second one?
Yeah. One more thing, like, was very interesting. I found, as a marketer, I always like to understand how am I influencing everything from the moment where they think about a problem to, when I'm on their consideration set to when they actually choose me as the vendor, right? So there's a lot to do there. There's a lot to sort of create awareness and attention, and then create credibility, earn trust, be around when the timing is right for them to solve that problem. Because businesses aren't always immediately looking to solve a problem, right? If they prioritize. So sometimes it's really good to understand, well, how can I be top of mind until when they are ready and the business conditions are right? But one of the things we realized was they had in their annual operating plan, they wanted to go up market, which is what a lot of mid-sized companies do. Right?
It's the dream. Yeah.
It's the dream. And for great reason. I understand why. What was very interesting, though, is when we did the analysis of talking to the customers who fit that segment, and then we went back and looked at our marketing and we mapped the two of how they buy versus what we were doing, we had zero. We had nothing that spoke to this larger, higher lucrative segment, but in the ways that they consider products, right? Everything they did to consider a product, find it out, evaluate whether it was credible. We didn't have anything that spoke to that or fit within that journey. So if we wanted to go up market, we had to do a lot of different things, right? So that's why research to me is the foundation of marketing and always has been, because then you start to figure out, like, where do we actually throw the dart and where choices are better than others? What are the trade-offs we have to make? So yeah, that's, I think, was a key learning for that company after we did that research.
The swim upstream to bigger fish is always so fun because it's like it always makes sense on paper, but it's what comes with it. It's the longer decision cycles. It's now this is going to take 8 meetings as opposed to 3. So it's a hard pivot. All right. Going on to story number 2. This one is all about within the construction technology space. You were put in an environment where there's a lot of sales going on, but no marketing. So tell us about that journey of kind of you getting in and what did you do to build that up?
Yeah, this was a company where I ran marketing and I was their first senior hire. Construction's a very interesting vertical. It's one of those verticals. This is what the term I use. I'm not sure if other people use this term, but like legacy industries is. So I think of like finance, healthcare, construction, industries that have been around for hundreds of years, right? They often are very slow to change. They have very sort of traditional ways of doing things. And we were selling a piece of this company still sells a piece of technology that's very new and was very ahead of its time for this industry. They had a sales team. They were doing okay. They had a director of sales that was phenomenal, brought in 50% of the revenue. But that's not scalable, right? Like one person can't have every single meeting, with every prospect and close every deal. It's just not feasible. So I was brought in to help build out a marketing team. They had a few already that reported to the CEO, but they wanted a marketer. And, I'm very much, I live in the mindset of being aligned with sales. It's joined at the hip. I talk to the team every day. How's it going? What are you hearing? What are your challenges? Because that's so vital, because I come before they do, right? Like the work I put out is the first thing people see. And then if I do my job well, then sales is, able to set things up and sort of knock them down, right? It's so vital to have that pairing. But when I looked at the landscape around what we had to support them, we had nothing. No case studies, no buyer personas. I don't really use that term anymore. I usually use a term like average buying story or path to purchase. It's all the same thing though. It's like, why are they buying? Why would they be choosing us? What are the market forces and market conditions and the business problems and challenges that exist that they would turn to us? We had none of that intelligence, right? Where are they buying? How do we get in front of them? What are things they care about? So I had to start from scratch, right? And for me, again, if we've been following the narrative, what we're talking about, like to me, it starts with the customer. Challenge I had was I kept asking for names. I didn't really get many. And
now, they didn't want to share them, or they didn't know, or both?
A bit of both.
Yeah.
Other marketers might have shared this experience. There's often a lot of politics around who gets to talk to the customer in organizations. And I'm used to that, navigating that now, but not everyone probably is. And, sometimes customer success wants to be the people that speak to customers. Sometimes sales say, well, it's my account. I want to have that touch point. I understand. Yep. Right. So I just care about, at the end of the day, why are people choosing us? So, I wasn't getting the names I wanted. So I just started going through Salesforce myself, and I picked up the phone, and it was very brash.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, Steve, like I have a budget that I need to spend. I need to hit certain dates in the calendar to achieve certain things. And I want to understand where I'm going to put my money. So I started talking to customers myself. And it's very interesting what, I was able to learn in a short period of time and then apply that to the marketing that we had. And, what's very interesting now is a lot of when I go back and look at this company's website and some marketing activities, stuff that I initiated then, they're still doing today. So that's nice. It's a nice little touch, right? Because there was all this stuff. If we talk about buying journeys, the sales team was focused on one specific persona, but in B2B, there's often many people involved, right? There could be 2 or 3 people involved in a deal and evaluating a piece of software or some type of solution or some type of service. There was one key person that was involved in the deals the whole time. I know, because I went in Salesforce and I saw who they were and what their titles were. But they never came up in conversations with the sales team when I went to go talk to them on the floor every day. Like, who is this person? Why are they there half the time? Their credit card keeps showing up. I want to go talk to this person. I want to understand what they're thinking. And that was a key thing. That was a big piece that we figured out by talking to them. Yeah. That we started putting in our marketing.
So how long did it take you to kind of take them from nothing into a place where you felt like, all right, we've got some of the basics in place?
It was tough. They were still early stages. They were transitioning into a new product out of some older products that were not really landing in the market. Their whole thing, their piece of technology was a sensor that went to concrete and attached to a phone, and you could see how concrete was curing in real time. It was very new technology for the industry at the time, but they'd started in a very scientific realm. So they were having to transition out of that. And the CEO was leading marketing, and they did well, but they were an engineer, right? And I say that because it takes time sometimes to make the business case about why you want to invest in certain things, right? Because it's just not comfortable territory for people who don't have a marketing background. They get sales, right? I have a salesperson, maybe I can close a deal. Marketing's a bit more of a leap of faith sometimes, and it's not always easy to connect the dots. But again, that's why I like to lean into understanding the path of purchase. Because if I can say this sample size or this set of buyers, they do these things before they look to our product. So if I can focus on building awareness and tension around these things and have our marketing sort of talk to these things, then the odds of them leaning into us when the time presents itself will be that much greater for our chances of success. So, I probably, 4 to 5 months is when I felt like we were starting to turn the corner around things, right? No longer than I thought, but in a company that had never done marketing really in sort of a new way, that's actually not too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough environment. I mean, there's the demand side of marketing, which is usually a pretty straightforward story because like you're essentially selling in a marketing channel. The
Yeah.
other stuff, it can be challenging, and sometimes you can get through it because you've got your head of sales saying, "No, this is good stuff. We need it." Other
Yep.
times, the CEO might say, "This is inherently a good long-term decision. I need to build the brand, not just sell every quarter." Other people, going back to the research world, validate it. When I did larger campaigns and put it to like a couple of markets, you could actually follow up and say, all right, well, what do people think now? So what's the pre and the post? And
Yeah.
sometimes that was a great tool to validate, to say, well, people who have seen our marketing think like this, as opposed to those who didn't see it. I've always loved just the basic banner test, control versus test. And you just, serve one group. We used to serve like Red Cross banners, just like we would just use their banner to drive awareness of the Red Cross. And that would be our group to test against. And it's just so powerful to say, look, we served these audiences different messages, and here's what they thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. I like the story. I like the world of construction, and I spent a little bit of time in that industry in a former life. So the construction world is fascinating, especially now. It's like the models post pandemic. Like, are
Yeah.
people buying in big buildings, or do they not want that? Are they creating hubs?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating space.
It was interesting because it really forced us to learn, when you get back to like who was in a deal and who cared, it forced you to understand what made sense to talk about, because, there was two critical people in a deal there. One was the user of the technology, who was maybe someone on site with part of putting concrete in place and running a team. Their challenges, though, were much different than someone back at the office, because on the site they were just hoping people showed up, right?
Right.
The weather cooperates.
Yeah.
Some of them had never even used a smartphone in their life, but the technology we were selling was dependent upon Bluetooth. Some of them had never even seen an iPhone.
Yeah.
So and part of our marketing was onboarding them on how to use an iPhone.
Yeah.
But when you spoke to the other person involved in the deal, they were usually back at the office overseeing 5 construction projects going on at one time. And what they cared about was saving time in the process of construction. Because for many new buildings, I can see your one now, it's probably made of concrete. Half of the project time, 50% of the project time is concrete. So even if you can save 3 to 4 weeks, I might be able to, get my financing cleared sooner,
Yeah.
or I might get a bonus from my client because I delivered the asset faster. There's all these. That's what they cared about. The other person just cared about, man, it's raining today. That sucks, right? They worked together every day, but what they wanted the technology for was vastly different. So as a marketer, you have to go understand, okay, well, how can I navigate all that, right? And if you're going to sit behind a laptop and just try and figure it out, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
You need to understand what these people care about and how they make decisions. Sorry, I just wanted to add that there because
it's a good point. I really liked what you said about like the user adoption of the actual tool. It reminded me of a case study someone shared with me once. This was like a muffler mechanical franchise, and they were trying to get the guys in the shop who were doing the actual work to move from the traditional clipboard, diagnose the problem, write down what it is, do all the estimate, and they wanted to move that all digitally. And their way to drive that adoption was actually they created a iPad friendly app that was designed the exact same orientation as the clipboard. So they would show the people like, no, hold it on the right side, just like you're always used to. And it was fascinating, is like those little tiny things can drive adoption. And they were like, look, if we can get, 2 pages of content in that app, then like they'll do it. That's just fascinating stuff. Like that is true customer insights that makes its way into product design and user experience. Even though, the UX person on that product is like, this is ridiculous. Like I could do so many amazing things using all these different navigations, but it's like, it doesn't matter. The user doesn't care about you showing off. It's about you relating to that that user and making it
yeah.
simple for them.
100%, all the time.
All right, let's jump into getting to know more about you. When did you first kind of go, aha, I think B2B marketing is fun? Maybe you're not there yet. I don't know. But when did it first hit you?
Sorry, that was like a horrible response to your question. That made it sound like, I mean, there's always fun stuff about it. And what I will say is funny. Everyone talks about B2C as like, it's the best. Well, there's challenges of that too, right? Right? Like nothing's perfect. I don't know. I probably, it's actually been in the last 5-6 years I've had the most fun, because I think there's just so much more opportunity now to do things that we would not have thought of, years ago. I've always been someone that really tries to sort of, I don't want to say push the envelope. That's not right the word, but just try to be different in my B2B marketing. Like, I worked for an incubator for a few years, and I was their senior marketing strategist, and I'd worked on like their international campaigns, because we were an incubator / economic development agency up in Canada. And we had no talent attraction campaign. So most of them were really boring. And it was just like, come live in our city. And like, who cares? What I showed was, I was like, it'd be fun. I used to, there's this really cool festival we have called House of Paint, which is all slam poetry, breakdancing, and hip hop. Let's make that the attraction video. And that's what we did. So I emailed them like, can we borrow your B-roll and make the attraction video for the city of Ottawa? They're like, yeah, you can. That was it. So I was like, come work as a coder in Ottawa. Like, hey, breakdancers, come dance, but learn code on the side, whatever it was, right? Like, so I say that was like 7 years ago, and the collared shirts were like, sort of stiff around that. But I remember when I showed the video at the time, so for your context, like, I'm from Ottawa, Canada. That's the headquarters for Shopify. Most people know Shopify, the e-commerce platform. They're much smaller then, and their CEO, Toby, he was on the board of directors for this incubator / economic development agency. So I'm showing like the campaign to all the directors of the board, and all the B2B people for like doing it for 30 years were like looking at it like it's crazy. Toby was like applauding, and he's like, yeah, he's like, because what was his problem? Well, he wanted a bunch of engineers to come to the city because he couldn't find any, right? But he also understood that B2B was changing, and it has changed, I think, in the last few years. If you look at really cool companies like Gong, who I love, their marketing, sales intelligence, like, they just knock it out of the park. They did a Super Bowl ad a year ago, I think maybe 2 years ago. And when you listen to their CMO, Udi, like, sort of talk through the logic of it, it was like, oh my God, that was great. So smart. Yeah. So it's fun now, I think, Steve, because we're not confined to, I think, anymore what people think it should be. There's so many ways that marketers can be creative and use ingenuity to like really do interesting things. So yeah, I think it's more fun in the last 5 years. So that was a super long answer to your question.
Yeah. You were just buying time to think about, is this fun? Should I do it?
Yeah.
I do, I would say the first couple of years for me in B2B were tougher in just understanding the buying dynamics, because I grew up B2C. Yeah. And you were just always laser focused on, I'm talking to a person or maybe two people. If it was like, hey, if we're selling a car, it's a husband-wife conversation. B2B is just so much more complex and tricky and political. It's kind of like, what is said in the meeting isn't necessarily what's happening. Where on the consumer side, they're just going to tell you like, I don't like it. It's too expensive. I don't understand you. But there's just so much more that happens in the B2B space where it's like, here's our buyer, but they're not disclosing that like their boss has another, agenda or provider, but he's not going to tell us. And we don't like, it's maybe like the analogy is like, it's more checkers than, or I should say it's more chess than checkers in the B2B world. It's just, there's always something going on that you have to interpret. It's not as blatant.
Yeah, I agree with that. I still think, though, if you do your job well, you'll understand how to navigate some of that. But you're right. That's always there. But that's never really bothered me too much. I think for me, that's almost part of the fun is like trying to crack the code.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and especially as you put more of a sales hat on as a marketer, that's what I've learned
Yeah,
about me
absolutely.
too. It's like I think when I started, it was more about, well, I'm going to show you the capabilities of what I'm selling you. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to show you case studies. And these days, I've tried to take that, like, I'll give you all the marketing stuff before the meeting, just so if you want to read it, you can read it. But the meeting now just becomes a conversation. If it's a half-hour meeting, I'm going to give you the 5-minute pitch because you want the 5-minute pitch. So it's interesting how I've just devolved my marketing in those types of settings, because you realize the conversations and where the buyer is leading their own journey is the way to do it, as opposed to just say, here's our process, here's the structure that you need to adopt to.
Because that's what it is now. They are leading their own process.
Yeah.
That's what's flipped, right? When I started, when I was a buyer, I wrote about this on LinkedIn a few times. I had to rely on my account executives or other vendors for information. I had to talk to peers, and I didn't have many of them, right? I only had a few. I had to actually physically leave the office to understand what was happening in the landscape, which is fine. I was reliant on so many things. It has totally changed now. I can build a consideration set of solutions, vendor services in 10 minutes by dropping one question in a Slack group. Hey, I'm trying to do this. What do y'all do? Perfect. Yep. There's 10 options. I'll go see what those are about. Happened in 10 minutes, right? When that would have taken me at least a month before to sort of figure that all out. So yeah, like the buyers control everything now. So you have to understand and respect that. But if you know that, then you can leverage that to your advantage, right? You just understand how and what they care about.
Yep. What's your you mentioned Gong as a platform that you like to use. What are some other things that you're like, I love it, can't live without it?
Oh, it depends. Like, I guess it depends on what I'm doing. Like, as a marketer, putting my marketing hat on, I've always been partial to things like Hotjar, or, product people will use things like Full Story or Heap, just like trying to understand what's happening with people and, how they use a product. As a researcher now, I care about things like, I care about LinkedIn a lot, funny enough, because I spend a lot of time there just trying to understand people. Like, I read a lot of conversations and nuance between people, what they post. I use a lot of research platforms. So there's a lot of different ones I use, or even survey platforms, right? I use a piece of software right now a lot too, called User Interviews and Respondent.io. And what those are aggregated populations of different disciplines, skill sets, expertise, interests. So if I want to go and talk to 12 software buyers that are in this role and have these skills, I can pay for access to them. I can go talk to them. And I do that a lot, where a lot of UX and design people do that, product people do that. But I do it as a marketer, because I just want to understand, in addition to my buyers, why they buy, I want to understand the market, the segment of the market that I'm talking to as a whole, who might not even know I exist. What do they care about? Is it the same things? Am I missing something? Is there a part of the story that I'm not gleaning into? There's all these things. So I use a lot of those things as a qualitative researcher to really inform what I do. And I use tools now for like aggregating that data, tagging the data, and deriving insights from all those interviews. So yeah, that's very niche to me, but
yeah,
that's sort of where my brain is these days.
Okay. All right, we'll do one or two more questions. I feel like if there was a male equivalent of Barbara Walters, I feel like that's what I'm turning into. Looking back over your life. So, all right, here's my question. You're talking to your young self in your first marketing gig, and you kind of tell him, listen, I know that you feel really strongly about this. Don't trust yourself. Trust me. Think about it this way. What kind of advice would you give to the young marketer that you once were?
Be very curious and don't take answers at face value, especially ones inside the company. It's so easy, in my experience, to really get seduced by your own ideas. And they might be really good. They might be fantastic ideas. But how do you know that? How do you know that what you want to do is something that will actually move the needle?
Yeah.
If you aren't sure, You should go find out. That's the advice I'd give, because it's a bias to action is good, but is that action worth your time?
Yeah, that's really good. I think I can relate to that advice where you get so caught up in, the exciting part of marketing is the ability to come up with an idea and see it produced. And sometimes young marketers don't balance that enough with, I like it. It brings me joy. What does it do for the customer or the prospect? And it's kind of you got to have the win-win there. Otherwise, you're just a marketer with an agenda trying to do something that you think works. And that's hard because you're like, no, it's a great idea. It's funny.
Yeah. But I think what you realize as you get more into your career, I don't know about you, Steve, but I've found that as I understand the customer more, you actually see really cool and interesting ways to do things that other people have not thought of because of the depth of your knowledge, right? That's the part I really find fun now. There's all sorts of things that you think of like, what if we did this? And sometimes the looks I get from my colleagues are a little out there, but I'm like, we should try this. This could be a thing, right? And I say that because this is what we've seen.
All right, awesome. Well, that's going to wrap up the show. Thank you, Ryan Paul Gibson, for joining us. I really enjoyed getting to know more about your background. I love that we got into the market research area. Marketers need more of it. We need to take it. It needs to be the new apple a day keeps the doctor away saying.
Yeah. Apple away keeps the CEO out of your office.
That's right. And by the way, congrats to the Apple's, conglomerate who pushed that agenda.
Yeah.
Like, so I just have to eat your product and I'm good. All right, let's do it.
Smart.
Some of those really old school marketing things.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Steve. It's been great.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Interesting B2B Marketers podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's episode, please help grow the podcast by sharing with others and leaving a review. We'll see you next time.